This dream would follow on from the previous dreams I have had, where I was afforded objective views of potential virtual reality worlds, brought forth by the activation of nanobots by the 5G. A robotization of the human race that would be made an actuality through the agreement to this dastardly 5G technology, as the nanobots within every individual would be activated resultingly. And not only this, but it seems all those transformed would be subjected to another virtual reality stemming from the very biomechanical robot bodies that now were their physical vehicles. And so I would be given a glimpse of one of these potential virtual reality worlds, for it was my impression that there would be many variations, catered perhaps for each unique individual's created consciousness, categorizing everybody into the virtual worlds that would best appease their specific personal self-wants and desires. In essence, then, the unaware, who remain in cause and effect creation, are now not only projecting into future lifetimes based on their ideas, emotions, and personal self-desires, but projecting in fact into future virtual reality worlds. Normally, they would simply be forging a future spot somewhere in the creation matrix simulator. But now, with the inception of this black magic technology distortion, they will be twice removed from their awareness, and the is a simulation within a simulation. I would find myself viewing from the position of a creature in some vast labyrinth. Seems this place was filled with creatures of all kinds and descriptions, curious animal forms, and close approximations of creatures we know here on the earth, and some not so close that defy description. Seems that all these individuals just roamed about, doing very little, having no necessity to consume, and at first seemingly serving no purpose. And then other individuals entered this labyrinthian world, and they had a different function. They would rampage through this environment and seemingly seek to grow in might and prestige by destroying the aimless inhabitants that dwelled here. The inhabitants were of various size and capability, and would switch into action as they were attacked, or might indeed attack one of these invading individuals on sight. From the perspective of the inhabitants, death here for them was very real at the hands of the invaders. Fear was prevalent. It was surely a very negative environment to be in. My view would switch, and I was now objectively regarding from the position of an invader, and from their viewpoints This was just a kind of amusement or a game. They had nothing to concern themselves about. It seemed that should they meet an ill fate, they could reboot and try again, and they seemed oblivious that the individuals they killed were in morbid and abject terror as to their positions. For as the inhabitants were locked in this place and could not move beyond its confines, the invaders could, and had a kind of world of existence beyond this labyrinth. Viewing from one of the invaders, I could see how they entered this arena, had their fun, then retreated by choice, or if dispatched, back to this world beyond. The majority of their time in this beyond world being spent training for the time they would spend in the labyrinth. My impressions and what I gleaned through my awareness were thus. All these individuals in this experience were those who had been subjected to the nano-robotization, been inserted into a particular virtual world or virtual world circumstance in alignment with whatever they had focused on, projected, the ideas and emotions they had had, etc. The experience each were having was the effect of the cause set in motion by the agreement to whatever ideas they had embraced. In this case, individuals had found themselves in a kind of horror world, where they were the victims of constant attack, in a very limited world, where they had little function or purpose, and locked into their personal selves only. They were subjected to the programs running that had them doing just this, assuming the roles of simply targets in a kind of computer game, with very little consideration other than the fear they had due to the endless attacks that were their reality. They were thinking very little, projecting very little, as I had a viewpoint as one and several of these creatures too. It was a very restricted, programmed body vehicle that didn't allow much by way of free will activation in regards to thought and emotion. Those vehicles were present, yes, the 5 bodies, etc., but locked down in the programming that constricted these creational vehicles. The other individuals, through their choices, decisions, agreements, etc., had found themselves in a more liberating situation, but they were still locked in a similar programmed reality. All they seemed to do was exist in a place that was geared simply for the purpose of training for the attacks on the individuals within the labyrinth. This was the entirety of their lives, their singular point of existence. It seems that they had far greater lifespans. I had impressions of lengthy durations, perhaps indefinite, as again their world was defined by agreements and projections made prior to their current position, and seems the agreement was of indefinite lifespans, And so we have all these individuals trapped in virtual reality worlds with variations of decided upon and unconsciously maintained rule sets which made up the specifics of their worlds. Interestingly, there were some slightly more awake individuals who began to see more than the programmed world that had their personal self encased within. Some began to realize that those they destroyed in this game were actual individuals, and sought to try and bring a stop to the slaughter. But this was amusingly considered a conspiracy theory, but they made traction, and as I watched all this now from an objective position, and not from the positions of any individuals, I witnessed a growing unease about the nature of their reality, and up until now, what they had considered as a simple cannon fodder were perhaps more than just targets. It was hard for them to appreciate this, as the individuals in the labyrinth were so constricted. It was hard to imagine how they could be actual beings, but they were. They had a real self with the is too, and it was simply their created personal self and consciousness in creation that was operating from such a very limited and self-decided position. A little like a tree, how people will disregard trees and plant life and not consider them to be individuals on the basis of their limitation of motion and existence from a human's perspective. All the easier then to cut them down if they are not reflecting what individuals consider to be ways of being that are similar to their own. And so I had the impression, as I was saying, of not just a standard virtual reality simulation within the creational simulator, but multitudes of them designed through agreement. And people who remain unaware and having to experience the unconscious effects of their unawareness will be aligning themselves now with whatever virtual reality best fits with what they are projecting now in terms of ideas and agreement. Some far more restricting than others, but all restricted to a greater degree than the lifetimes we currently have. Either people assume these robot forms, or are born into them, and then are transitioned to a virtual reality within them, uniquely catered to their projections and created a consciousness. And again, even in such scenarios, people do exhibit degrees of awareness and waking up, but a far harder circumstance to do so within. Imagine trying to come to grips with and recognize that not only are you in a simulator for is recognitional purposes, but you are in a robotic body within that on the physical level, and within a virtual reality within that mechanized shell. This would in fact then be a theoretical sixth life level. The physical life level was level number 1, And yes, these individuals would have the robotized physical vehicles there, but now they are locked in a virtual world within the mechanized robotic vehicle. And their focus is in these virtual worlds. Like a virtual reality headset, you never can take off. People born into this reality would not even consider the possibility of being in a virtual reality within a simulation, and those that transitioned into it in this lifetime, if unaware and thus programmed, and far more so through their robotic vehicles, they could easily be made to forget, a kind of mechanical induced Alzheimer's, as an example. They can no longer perceive the physical level that their robotic bodies reside in. They perceive now this new virtual world, and in essence then, they are technically another literal level removed from the ears. A hypothetical life level number 6. Based on this, we can see that the perpetuation of these virtual realities are dependent on the maintenance of the robotic vehicles on the now redundant physical life level. Unless the physical level vehicle is destroyed, the individual cannot return to the astral and then move on to the next position. And so we have robotic vehicles which could theoretically self-repair if nano-infused, and could be indefinite in their durations, and in turn these virtual realities that stem from the robot bodies would be likewise just as eternal. It's possible that if an individual is dispatched in the labyrinth in my dream, yes, they may be gone from that position, but if their robotic vehicle remains on the physical, then they'd simply be rebooted and returned back to the same virtual reality again. Unless an individual transitions to the astral, they cannot assume a different lifetime and position. And considering how locked down these realities are, there appeared little room for consideration beyond that which the realities comprised of. So things would be fairly static. There would be no change in collective ideas and agreement to them that afforded experience to move things along. And would these virtual reality worlds even operate with the same cause and effect principle as currently is in effect in the creational simulation? Do the computer games we play have cause and effect going on there? Not exactly, as whatever we decide within a game is limited according to the programmed parameters. And the parameters are decided by those that built it. We can want things and desire things in our games, but unlike creation, it is not a reflective bubble, and cause and effect will not provide us with the experience that flows from our desires. Of course, the virtual realities that are coming are based on what people are projecting now. So currently, cause and effect is forging these future realities, these future life level 6 places, as we are still in creation where the principle of cause and effect applies. But once we are within them, the walls come crashing down, and we are effectively within computer games of our own making, and restricted by the programming which binds that world. Cause and effect cannot be brought to bear. Only one thing remains, that of real awareness. The real self will still be there with the ears, waiting to be recognized. And it's still possible that connection to it can be made, but it seems life within a programmed computer game cannot move in accordance with that which we decide or choose. So experience, and thus the opportunity for comparison, will be limited. But even in all this restriction, we have the other 5 bodies, so intuition and imagination are still accessible, and beyond a programmed virtual reality, within a programmed simulator, and it is from these we might get glimpses and hints of something more, and beyond our locked down virtual existences, and then maybe an opportunity to become aware and recognize the ease, assuming the guides can reach us in such an existence. Would we even dream? If the physical life level robots never shut down, and sleep isn't a necessity or a feature of these decided virtual realities, then it might be rather difficult to have real side experiences. Do the computer game characters in the games we play now dream? Finally, about the whole agreement to the 5G that is required to make this an actuality. I don't think getting agreement will be too hard, as most are addicted to technology, and so will desire their new 5G cell phones. But if that fails, I surmise agreement will be sought via the climate change scare and fear tactics, and this is very programmed and heavily prevalent on the TV at the moment, the endless marches, etc. The objective is to reduce carbon, but it doesn't end there. The further objective, and this is publicly spoken about, is to reduce carbon to 0. They are effectively telling us that to save the planet, we must be producing 0 carbon, which means that there can be nothing living on this planet, as carbon is what we exhale, that the plants inhale, and vice versa. They are garnering agreement to this 0 carbon idea, and the only way to do this is to kill every living thing, or yes, to robotize everything, that all carbon emissions will cease, as robots don't need to breathe. This, I suggest, they will be proposing as a means to save the world, that we must become robots. They may even reveal the existence of nanobots, and tell us that the nanos we have within us will do the job once the 5G is switched on. If enough people agree, if enough are afraid of the consequences, should they not, that of carbon-caused climate change, then they will openly accept robotization, agreeing to the 5G, happy to let the nanos do their work, and agree ultimately to the virtual reality worlds that will follow.
Yes, as I'm listening to you, okay, so I'm going to create this other position about environmental education. You kids will all be involved in this because of what's coming up. Very, very important. It's going to be huge for this world. Yes, thank you very, very much. Just very well said. Thank you.